land used for the people. So, unfortunately, you can't have a parking spot behind this building, and he sold that for an additional $250,000. Now, so we're going to try to cut over on Berkeley Street and make our way down onto Beacon. Now, I mentioned Berkeley. We're going to go by Arlington and Berkeley and Clarendon and Dot. Where the building is located here, what is known as Copley Square, it is kind of like a wind tunnel and a lot of pressure on the windows. And what was happening around 1975 when the building was just the new John Hancock. Of course, as we drive by the Trinity Church, you'll also see the reflection of the church inside the building. Up ahead of us, we have the Boston Public Library, the first free library in the United States. And it started right here in Boston. Now, I always like to make a little comment. If you look underneath the arched windows of all the libraries surrounding the with his troops to begin the battle out in Lexington. We'll talk about that a little bit later after we leave the Cambridge area. But right now we are going to be heading down into Cambridge. We probably all know that Cambridge is the location of two major units. Up there to take a look at the car to make sure it was all right. As the officer looked through the window, he sees a mannequin in the front seat behind the steering wheel dressed in a police uniform. That wasn't as bad, but the mannequin was eating a donut. So that made him a little upset. Now the bigger problem was, how are they going to get that car down? Well, with the columns on the front of it is Boston Symphony Hall, the location of where the Boston Pops plays. You've probably seen the Boston Pops on 4th of July celebrations at the Hat Shell along the Charles. And I'm sure you've heard of Boston Pops by under Keith Lockhart, our conductor. That building is acoustically designed back one of our major roadways in and around Boston today. Back in the early 1700s, Massachusetts Avenue was just a little dirt path that ran from Boston all the way up towards the Concord area. The large building to our right is the Christian Science Church in Monitor, under Mary Eddy, founder of the church. One of our largest places right now in Boston. You can see it along Commonwealth Avenue. Earlier that, actually was done in the 1940s by MIT student graduating class also. We'll be crossing what is known as the Massachusetts Avenue Bridge and crossing over the Charles River. As we get up onto the bridge, take a look on the sidewalk on the right. You're going to see numbers painted on the sidewalk, and those are amount of feet that it takes to cross the bridge. The only difference is called smoots. So take a look over here on the bridge. You'll see numbers painted on there, green numbers, purple numbers, and they all mark the amount of smoots it took at that point to cross the bridge. See right here on the right, and you can see, actually you'll see the name Smoot right over here in purple, painted, 36 Smoots, and so forth. So this is how they painted, this is how they measured the bridge originally in 1940. As we cross over the Charles River, you can see some of the boat two teams out there practicing. Eventually in October we have the major Charles Regatta, where all the Ivy League colleges come in and participate in crew racing along the Charles. Very famous event, brings in over 100,000 people to watch. Up ahead of us is the MIT buildings. Everything to the right is all their labs and their classrooms. Everything to the left is their student activities and dorm rooms. That domed building you see just ahead of the bus, with the round dome and the flat spot on top, is where they placed the police car last year's graduating class. They put it on top of the building. As I said, it took them five hours to do it. One thing interesting about MIT, it was established back in 1865 by a man named Roger William Barton. But unfortunately, we all know what happened to him. He was assassinated, and his vice president, Lyndon Baines Johnson, took over. Lyndon Baines Johnson was from Texas. Guess where NASA is today? Okay, this is the front building of the MIT, this column building. As you see, some of the students right now actually walking the stairs. Every student has to enter the way this student is, even today under William Barton. And this is MIT's main building. We're continuing down Massachusetts Avenue, and this empty parking lot that's coming up on our right, the next set of lights, would have been headquarters for NASA if it was under John F. Kennedy. One of the graduating students of John Harvard, upon his graduation, did very well for himself in his business occupations. And upon his death, he left a very, very large endowment to the Newtown Theological School, town workers and so forth. And this is all given to by MIT and Harvard University. Now we just left Central Square. We'll be coming into Harvard Square in just a few minutes as we make our way over to Harvard itself. Now, just like it houses many first editions and very famous and rare books at the Widner Library donated to Harvard. Any of these gates that you see here will take you eventually into the Harvard area, Harvard Square, Harvard campus, excuse me, or Harvard Yard, as it's known. Any of these gates will do that. But we're going to show you the gate, the main gate, where you can see the John Harvard statue in just a moment. This house that's coming up on the right, it's a yellow house right here just past the brick building. It's known as the Wadsworth House. Now we're going to come back again because we're going to do a swing around Harvard and come back through here, so if you want to see it again, you'll be able to. Harvard Square. The out-of-town news right here to our left, this building right here, a small building, has all the newspapers and magazines from all the foreign countries. Now we used to be able to pretty much park where that police car is, but they don't let us do that anymore, and that's the reason he's there. Now as I do go through this light, take a look to your right, the sidewalk. If you look straight down that sidewalk, there's an American flag. Underneath the American flag is the statue of John Harvard. That is the center of the Harvard Yard. So take a look down there. You should be able to see the people gathered around it. So I'm going to go by slowly because I'm sure the policeman is not going to be happy with us. There we go. So that's the Harvard Yard, that place where John Harvard statue. I'm going to swing around again to show you some more of the buildings of Harvard and maybe get another little bit of view of their Harvard Yard area. Now, every building you see here is all part of the Harvard University. Now, not all of Harvard University is located here. Some is part of the Harvard Business School, which is over near the river. There's Harvard Medical, which is on the Boston side. But the main, about 5 years ago now, became the Harvard Art Museum. This is beautiful paintings and recreations of sculptures inside the building. This is part of the Harvard Yard. If you took any of those sidewalks, you can walk right down to see the John Harvard statue. Take a look at some of the gates here. The entrances to the gates have plaques on them, and they have dates. And these are the dates that these were donated from certain classes, and they were given to in 1826, class of 1908. So you can see some of the items here, and this is all part of the Harvard University campus. Over here we have the Lamont Library, another one of the libraries that are owned by Harvard University. In fact, a few months, last October of 2016, I had a family on the bus from, happened to have the same last name as the Lamonts, And they were said they were here from Minnesota actually to see this library because their relative is the one who actually started this library. One of the Lamont family members started it and donated it to the Harvard University back in 1956. And we do make our way around Harvard Square again. I mentioned the John Harvard statue, but right outside the gates on the left side of the bus is another statue of Charles Sumner. Now, Charles Sumner was a senator from Massachusetts during the Civil War, 1860. And unfortunately, he met a kind of a early Dr. Samuel Prescott. Now, Paul Revere is the most well-known because of the poem that Henry Wadsworth Longfellow initiated, The Midnight Ride of Paul Revere. Paul Revere was from Boston. William Dawes was actually from Cambridge. And Dr. Sam Prescott, he was from Concord. Now, the funny part about that poem, the only reason that Longfellow used into the sidewalk, and those horseshoes are embedded in that sidewalk, and they belong to the horse of William Dawes. Now, I'm not really sure if they're honoring William Dawes or his horse, because the horse did make it to Concord without the rider. What happened, take a look at this sidewalk right here, as this guy crosses, and people cross. Take a look at the sidewalk. You look there, you'll see the gold horseshoes embedded into the sidewalk, right there. Now, the reason I say they're honoring the horse, what happened was that William Dawes, riding along the trail of the Massachusetts Avenue from Lexington to Concord at very high speed along horseback at dark, in the dark at night, thought he heard British forces. He simply turned his head at the inopportune time, and a branch sticking out hit him in the head, knocked him off his horse. He laid unconscious on the trail. When the British scouting party simply came back from Concord, they came upon Dawes laying in the ground. They picked him up, and he was arrested. He never made it. The horse continued on by itself and made it to Concord. So I think they're honoring the horse and not William Dawes. But we'll take a look over here to the right. We just went by it, unfortunately. That's the cannons I just mentioned. The three cannons lie, and that's where George Washington took command of the of the American forces under the Continental Army. This building to our left, these brick buildings, this is Radcliffe University. Somebody might remember the name Radcliffe as the women's counterpart of Harvard. Well, it was actually studying a black man. He died instantly. The group saw this happen, stored, that's why it looks so nice. But that is an historic site. It's also became the British Field Headquarters, as you can see on the sign, British Field. 7 militia on our side were killed, and 1 civilian. Now, I'm going to be stopping a half a mile up the road in front of the visitor center. Inside the visitor center, there are restrooms. There's also a panorama. His original home right there. That's where Captain Smith, the head of the militia, lived. Right along the trail, as you can see, the battle trail. He simply walked from his house originally right over to along the trail to the Hartwell Tavern, which is just up here, a very short distance. Now, Prescott left the house on his horse, made his way to the Hartwell Tavern, like I said, and he tied his horse up. As he was walking in the front door, Captain Smith was leaving. Rachel got him, returned him, told him what was happening. He ordered the men to Sleepy Hollow Hill to wait for the British. The scouting party that had left and gave General Gage the directions realized that they didn't want to go through a hill. They wanted to head to an area where they would feel safe and secure for file. In order to get across that bridge, there's another little bridge up here at the actual spot known as Miriam's Corner. And I'm going to pull over here and show you Miriam's Corner, the ambush spot where another 47 British soldiers were killed and no militia. So right over here to the right, this little bridge, you see the people walking across. That's another little small narrow bridge that caused the British soldiers to go into single file. This trail that you see right here to our right, very narrow little trail, again, the reason they use this little narrow trail because this is Miriam's farm, Miriam's Corner, that house you see to the right. The very narrow trail surrounded a field of corn. So instead, British, rather than walking right through the field of corn, they simply walked around it, causing this little narrow trail, and the little narrow bridge caused a perfect ambush spot from the militia right next door. Take a look at this White House right here. They're doing some yard work or landscaping to it. But anybody ever hear the Concord grapes? Concord grape? Well, Concord grape was invented by this man right here, Ephraim Wales Bull. He invented the Concord grape. The name Concord grape is simply because we're living in Concord. But he took some grapes and he developed them into what he calls the Concord grape. Concord grapes are very now. So this is Louisa May Alcott's house. She was a Civil War veteran also. Just a little bit further up on the left, we have the Concord Museum. Small, very small, nice museum that's dedicated to a lot of the revolutionary items, including one of the lanterns that hung at the Old North Church. So this is located right over here at the Concord Museum. We also, on the other side of the Concord Museum, we'll see it on our return a little bit better, is the house of Old North Bridge. It's set up for the battle with the British. We're still arriving by coming just to the right of us off the side street, making our way down this road to the bridge. Now, I just mentioned a few minutes ago about British being devastated at the bridge with 289 British soldiers being killed. On the other side of the reservoir, those buildings you see up on the hill, that's part of Raytheon. Raytheon is a major distributor of electronics to our military, such as our Navy and Army. They're the ones that do the high electronics for all our missile guidance systems and so forth. Built up from all the automobiles, trucks, and buses that enter into the tunnel, it would be tremendous. Because of that, they built 6 ventilation buildings all around the city. And what they simply do is they suck out that carbon dioxide and pump in fresh air. One of those buildings will be coming up on our right. You can notice the building has a weird shaped chimneys, and it also has a yellow and green tile, assorted tiles around the building. And you'll notice that as we get closer into the tunnel, those will keep us alive as we get into these tunnels. A large amount of traffic would cause a tremendous amount of CO2. And you can't survive from that amount of CO2. So these ventilation buildings are very important. And as I said, there's 6 buildings around the city to accommodate these tunnels. You can see the weird looking chimneys coming up ahead of us in just a moment. Now once we enter in, this is the entrance to it, the entrance exit, and as we get into the tunnel, you'll see the tile and the brown stripe at the bottom. There it is there. Now if you happen to be driving over to the airport through one of these tunnels, you'll see the blue stripe. The blue stripe actually passes underneath the Boston Harbor over to Boston Logan Airport. Government Center exit. This will put us right in front of Faneuil Hall and Quincy Market. It's also the area of the North End, Little Italy. If anybody's interested in heading over to Little Italy on Hanover Street or Salem Street, the main roads of Little Italy. Very authentic Italian food there. If you don't want it for lunch, you might consider coming back here for dinner time or enjoy some of the Italian food in the area. Very authentic. If you're interested in seafood, of course we have a lot of seafood restaurants in and around the seaport area, but if you're just going to stay in the Faneuil Hall Quincy Market, it has a tremendous food court offering 28 different, just reoccupied as a shoe company. It was a warehouse at one time. And the beautiful bridge that you see over to the left, that is known as the Zakim Bunker Hill Bridge. The Bunker Hill part of it is very simple. If you look at the top part of the bridge, it looks very similar to the Bunker Hill Monument, which you see coming up on the right, up ahead of the bus. The front part of it, the Zakim part, is named after Leonard B. Zakim. He was a B. Zakim Bunker Hill Bridge. It is a cable-stayed bridge. It's part of the Big Dig project. It enters from the upper roadway into the tunnels. What it means by cable-stayed is it's held up with those white cables that you're seeing there. It happens to be the world's widest cable-stayed bridge. Not the longest, but the widest.
Yo no creo que se necesita
Directly in front of us, it has the little molasses tank that I told you about. 200,000 gallon tank stored right there. What happened when that blew, the molasses from both sides of the street flowed down into the cellars of these homes, and of course the horses and the people were drowned in that heavy thick molasses. That's the location of that where that tank was. 1850 that happened.
Is it where there's a wall or something?
Not anymore. All right, so now we walk actually through the center of it from the bottom, and you can read the plaques associated with the memorial itself. So if you have a chance, you want to come by and see the Holocaust Memorial here in Boston, this is it over here to our left. It's also right in front of the Union Oyster House, which is the oldest restaurant in Boston, located just on the left-hand side of the memorial. This is the back side of City Hall right here, City Hall Plaza, kind of one of our ugly buildings, but this is it. And of course, you're seeing the large crowd over here ahead of us on the left, the back side of Faneuil Hall. Some street performers doing their thing. They have magic acts, they have jugglers and so forth. At the top of Faneuil Hall, the gold dome you see right there at the very top, that is Faneuil Hall. At the top of it is a weather vane. Top of that weather vane is a grasshopper. The Declaration of Independence was read by John Hancock. What I want you to do is I want you to look at the sidewalk right beside these people who are standing here. You see that little circle of cobblestone right there in the center? And that is the location of the Boston Massacre we talked about earlier. So this is the original State House, replaced by our new State House up on Beacon Hill, which we'll see in a little while when we get up that area. I say new State House, it was built in 1797. So where all the burlesque houses, the strip joints, the bar rooms were all located. Made very popular by the U.S. Navy that came here during World War I and World War II. And eventually it was all closed up around 1960. Ian Corio, Mae West, all the top stars at the time, burlesque queens all made their debut right here in Boston, the old Howard Theater, very well known back in the 30s and 40s and 50s. 1960, all that closed up. This became the Government Center. I don't see a big difference between the red light district and the Government Center, but anyway. Post office. Our first post office in America is located right here on Charles Street. It's coming up on the right-hand side. It's American flag sticking out. You'll see the sign U.S. Post Office. It is one of the original post offices of the United States right here. Many of the little shops, the antique shops, fancy jewelry shops, very upscale area right here at Charles Street. Nice little shopping area. And any of these streets to our left. Few years it gets that ugly green color. Now it did look beautiful for a few years, but the governor didn't like the idea of the green, so what does he do? He calls back Paul Revere to change it. Paul Revere decides, well, okay, I'll change it. He takes off the copper sheathing and he puts on gold, pure 24 karat leaf gold on the top of the State House. Everything looks fine, it's beautiful, it's shiny, and it's still up there, but 1941, we enter into World War II. There's a possibility that Boston could be bombed by enemy aircraft. That dome would be a perfect target. So what they do, they paint over that gold dome gray. This way here, they could be outstanding. It wouldn't be State House. And if you look carefully over here to the left again, you'll see this opening in the stairway. And at the top of the stairway is a statue of John F. Kennedy. John F. Kennedy, the late president, was from Massachusetts, and they had to honor him by having a statue of him right on the stairway. Over here to the right, we have a statue to Robert Shaw. Robert Shaw was a lieutenant during the Civil War. He commanded an all-black army. You might have seen the movie Glory, and this is the monument to Robert Shaw and his men over here to the right. Over here to the left, we have a statue of George Hooker up on the corner here. General George Hooker was also made famous during the Civil War. Some of you might have heard the word hooker referring to women the wrong way back then, but I'll tell you, General George Hooker simply enlisted a bunch of nurses to follow around the battalion to make sure his men were cared for if they were wounded. These girls became known as the Hooker Girls, and that's how the name came about. This is Bowdoin Street. We're taking a left turn on Bowdoin. We're on the side of the state, as Congressman, Senator, and President of the United States. He maintained that office. The entrance to the building is 122 Bowdoin Street, the green door coming up on the right. That was his voting address. That's why he was able to vote down at the West End Church. Over here to the left on top. That eagle replaced that red beacon I mentioned to you earlier. The red beacon on top of Beacon Hill to warn the ships. They no longer need the red beacon, so they simply put the eagle up top there.
Fair warning before Tim does that. It's gonna just be in a few seconds. I'll give us a warning before Tim does those three horns.
Did you hear?
Yeah. What?
Are you ready?
Yeah.
20 minutes now. 20 seconds.
Happening right now. Yeah, thank you, Captain Tim. So as we do get started today, we're leaving from Long Wharf. This wharf you did enter the vessel from. This is the oldest continuous living water, getting its name from all of the freshwater streams that used to trickle down from the three hills of the Shawmut Peninsula right here into Boston's Inner Harbor. So we had these three different hills at first. There was Beacon Hill, Fort Hill, and Copp's Hill. When the Puritans settled here in Boston in the early 1600s, they all decided they wanted to expand their land out a little bit further into the harbor, and doing all of this through a process that was called wharfing out. The wharfing out of Boston took place when you would build two wharfs out of that man-made land. So yes, do wrap your minds around that number. 75% of Boston today completely artificially made. So all of the rock retaining walls you are going to see throughout the entirety of the Inner Harbor tour today means this was all once part of a much, much larger harbor in Boston. That is why Long Wharf is significantly shorter today than it was when it was built in 1710. Towards the end of the tour, I will be able to point out the exact original shoreline of Boston Harbor for you. So as we have turned around, getting ourselves situated towards South Boston to start our tour off, though we have this old rusted bridge splitting Boston proper on the right, South Boston on the left. It's called the Northern Avenue Bridge, a turnstile bridge, getting its name because it all used to turn on its central Eleanor, the Beaver, and the Dartmouth, proceeding to dump all of the cargo off the vessel. At the time it was called the Vertex Pharmaceutical Company sits to the left of the courthouse, marking what we call the Innovation District here in South Boston. Now, to the left of Vertex, we're coming up to a large glass cube-shaped building. The one I'm talking about here has a fourth floor overhang coming out over the harbor. It's called the ICA. Remember, stern, that is the back side of any boat, so the fishing vessels work. They do take nets, they throw it off the stern, drag it right through the water, all in order to catch its fish. There's a fishing restriction on commercial fishing in Boston's inner harbor, so the stern draggers will head out about 130 miles to George's Bank, one of the most fertile fishing grounds in the world, to do their fishing. In the 1920s, Boston decided they wanted an airport, so they surrounded these three islands with the rock retaining wall that we're looking at. Then they filled it all in with dirt from the hills of a nearby town called Needham, now making this 2,400 square acres of artificial land that we are looking at today. Logan is currently the 17th busiest airport in the nation. Planes do come and go roughly about every minute or so, and bringing in an economic activity of around $7 billion per year. And as we do come to the end of the airport, we have the Hyatt Regency Hotel, a large red brick building with its unique design on the side, designed to look like a lighthouse. Now, this is not a working lighthouse. It's just the elevator shaft of the building. When they originally opened up the fake lighthouse, they were shining a white beacon from the top, so bright it actually started to confuse ship captains out on the harbor who were trying to use this to navigate. It should not be a lighthouse place right there. So they have been very iconic to the island. You have heard of them. Again, an original basket from one of those ships could go from anywhere from $1,000 to almost up to $10,000 a piece at auction. Up next, we have Pierce Park, has a spaceship-like structure at the end, one of 3 monuments dedicated, but it does still hold a record as the longest running ferry service in the United States. It started running here in 1632 and it shut down in 1952. Ran for 320 years. Now, at one point, the owners of the penny ferry actually try to raise their price from 1 penny all the way to a nickel. And all the Bostonians, they did rebel against that, and riding on the streets, they forced the owners to lower their price back. And what we're looking at here in Boston, mostly a land bridge, doesn't travel over all that much water, as you can see. As we do get into Charlestown next, take a look at the bridge. It pretty much extends the entire length of the land in Charlestown. Turning into Charlestown next, it's a neighborhood of the greater Boston area. Everything directly in front of us here all used to be part of the old Charlestown Navy Yard. Second oldest Navy Yard in the country, second to the one in Philadelphia. Once one of the busiest as well, producing about 1 ship every month. 2 very famous vessels we are about to pull up here, the USS Constitution and the USS Castle Young. Now we can see all the condominiums, office parks, a restaurant at Pier 6. Here at Pier 4, we have Courageous Sailing docked off of the right side. Now, to the left of Pier 4, towards our starboard bow, we are starting to pull up to this historic portion of the Navy Yard. Now, again, we are going to be pulling up and docking here for just about 5 minutes. We're going to be getting much better, closer photo opportunities of the vessels as we do pull up to dock. Now, I do like to start these stories off a little early. It's got a rich history here. So, again, starting them off a little early, I'll repoint them out if you are a little confused of where I am correcting you at first. No worries, I'll repoint them out as we pull up closer. So look to the left of Pier 4, towards our starboard bow. There is a large gray vessel in the front, the USS Cassin Young. This is a World War II Fletcher-class destroyer. That was actually the last ship to be hit by a kamikaze pilot off the coast of Japan during the Battle of America. The kamikaze pilot did manage to make it all the way down into the engine room of the Cassin Young, killing 22 sailors. Black rigging, our old iron sides. So we pull up a little closer, the gray vessel in the front, USS Castle Young, a World War II Fletcher-class destroyer, class ship to be hit by a kamikaze pilot in World War II. But again, we are pulling up to dock our vessel here for just about 5 minutes. Going to be leaving right on the hour. So again, if you do wish to disembark, you may choose to do so. Just keep in mind that we will dedicate at least an hour of your time here. We will be back every hour on the hour up till and including 5 o'clock to pick you back up with a return trip today. And also keep in mind, remember 5 minutes, that's not enough time to get off this boat and come back onto the same one. Which was just a mistake when setting up camp on Breeds Hill instead of Bunker Hill. We thought a hill closer to the shoreline would be a better, more strategic place to fight the battle. Given instructions during the battle to see It was designed to look like the Bunker Hill Monument. Currently, right now, tied for the widest cable-stayed bridge in the world, tied with the bridge that was built in Vancouver, Canada in 2010. To the left of the bridge, TD Garden, home to our beloved Boston Bruins and Boston Celtics. But fully turning around now, we're leaving Charlestown, finishing our tour off with Boston's historic North End. Again, a historic neighborhood, primarily still an Italian neighborhood to this day. Looking into the skyline, we have a white steeple of the Old North Church, oldest church that was standing in Boston today, built in 1723. And it became famous when the sexton of the church, Robert Newman, hung 2 lanterns from the white steeple here. He was signaling to Paul Revere and William Dawes on land which way the British were going to be coming in from occupied Boston. 1 if by land, 2 if by sea, letting Paul Revere, William Dawes, all the Midnight Riders know that the British were coming in by sea. Sparking the Midnight Rides to Lexington and Concord, where they all exclaimed that the British were coming. So keep in mind, at the time, everyone was actually still considered a British citizen, so much more likely they're saying that the Redcoats are coming or the Regulars are coming. And also, right over here in the North End, we are looking into the site of the Great Molasses Disaster of 1919. This happened in the early 1900s. A rum distillery was set up right here in the shoreline of the North End. Now, molasses, that is used in the distillation of rum. And on one particularly hot January afternoon, the vat of molasses heated up so much, caused it all to explode. Then 2.5 million gallons of molasses started to barrel down Commercial Street, traveling at 35 miles an hour at a record peak wave of 17 feet tall. And the wave of molasses did unfortunately manage to kill 21 people, dozens of horses, took down some buildings, buckled the elevated subway lines, sunk a few docked ships here at the harbor as well. Took all the molasses from the flood. Coming up to Constitution Wharf next, you can tell the active duties of any Coast Guard veteran in the Civil War. Just to the left of Battery Wharf is Burroughs Wharf. You can see the Jonas Damrell Boston Fire Rescue Boat docked off the right side here, marking this is home to Boston Fire Department's harbor unit. Though I do want you now to take note of the walkway that is connecting both of the wharfs. It's all part of what we call the Boston Harbor Walk. It's built in an effort to rejoin Boston to her beloved waterfront. It is a continuous 44-mile walkway spanning the length of the harbor from Charlestown to South Boston. It's still expanding to this day, continuous in its stretch, though there are currently 2 exceptions to that right now. First exception is Constitution Wharf. You can't walk on the property of the Coast Guard for obvious security reasons. Next exception is Union Wharf, just to the left of Burroughs, with these 3-story tall rented condominiums. There is a law in the city of Boston saying that if you develop on the shoreline of the harbor, you need to include Boston Harbor Walk in your development. These private condos were built before they ever implemented the law, so you still cannot walk on their property. If you are interested in purchasing one of these condos, equipped with 3 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, and 2 wharf. We have a tall, skinny skyscraper here with top 4 clocks that are surrounding it. It's Boston's old custom house. The base of the building built in 1847. The tower, they're not constructed until 1914. At the time that it was constructed, the tallest skyscraper in Boston, because that is actually the very first skyscraper that was built here in Boston. Again, 1914. It held the record of the tallest in the skyline for over 50 years till the Prudential Center was constructed in 1964. There's a fun little story that goes along with the 4 clocks here as well. They all used to run on one central mechanism. Later adding an elevator shaft to the building caused them all to run on 4 completely separate mechanisms. Still to this day, none of the clocks here are going to tell you the same time, or actually give.
Yeah, that's why we celebrate March 17th as a holiday each year in the city of Boston. We call March 17th to purify their religion from the Church of England. And they first started building homes to your left in the north end. So that does actually mean the official battle of the Revolutionary War was fought. It was known as the Battle of Bunker Hill. 1775. The Battle of Bunker Hill was one of the bloodiest battles of the war. So when you think back to the beginning of the Revolutionary War, you just think about the American Army in Boston. Back in 1775, we were like the worst army in the world back then. Really good experience. Back to the farmers, brave militias that were thrown together to make the American Army. Armies of the world. Where's the right? Check it out, the Zakim Bridge. Some of the only free parking you can find in downtown Boston over there on the Zakim Bridge. Little build material for the West End. My favorite part about the West End is the fact that we're only here for about a minute. Once we get out from the big parking garage in front of us, we'll be heading towards the capital of Massachusetts. Towards the left-hand side at the moment, you're going to see our new Massachusetts State House, where we do all our state lawmaking. A building that was constructed in 1798, but we still call it the new State House. Just a lot newer than the old State House. Well, right in front of it for stop number 8, if anybody wanted to hop off here. If you want to check out the burial grounds. So once again, the State House is closed to the public on the weekends, but if you want to take a tour on a weekday, Monday through Friday, for a brief period of time, the once president of North Vietnam, Ho Chi Minh, was a pastry chef inside the Omni Parker House Hotel. If you take a look to your left, we have our big statue of Benjamin Franklin right in front of Old City Hall. Old City Hall served as the mayor's office in Boston from 1865 until 1920. For 100 years it served as the mayor's office. But if you take a look towards the right across the street, there's a red brick building over there. You get a good look at that red brick building. It's called the Old South Meeting House.
In what year?
1850. Basically what happened in 1850 is that Harvard used to be an all-men's school, but in 1850 for the first time they started allowing women to take classes here. But it didn't exactly work like it does today. So the way it was back then is actually women were not allowed to come into Harvard Yard. This area was for the men, male students of Harvard, and the women had their own separate campus about a 15-minute walking distance in that direction. And it was called Radcliffe College. So the way this worked is that the professors would teach the men here in the yard during the day, and in the afternoon they would go ahead and teach the same classes to the women over in Radcliffe. That's how the system worked for many years up until World War II. During World War II, a lot of the men here of Harvard went off and fought in the war, and so there wasn't enough students to fill in the classrooms. So they actually decided to allow women from Radcliffe to come here and live in the yard and fill in the classes. And so little by little they started changing how the universities really acted towards each other. And in 1970, for the first time ever, Harvard and Radcliffe signed an agreement joining both universities under one name. That was Harvard's name. So in 1970, Radcliffe ceased to exist as an institution, but Harvard became for the first time Right, and that's how it remains until today, 1970. Right, so we're going to head over this way.
tiene que bajar por 4. Slow as much.
Para el año que viene, cuando esté aquí, te va a chocar lo de que se va
61, Interstate 87 northbound towards Buffalo. Then, take the freeway.